The business wasn't loud. There were no customers coming and going. No signs. No disruption. But that didn't stop the HOA president from declaring it illegal. She said home businesses weren't allowed. She said I had to shut it down immediately. She warned that fines were already being prepared and that enforcement would be swift. The problem was, I wasn't operating in secret. I had a city-issued business license. Zoning approval. Everything done by the book. And the moment I realized she hadn't checked any of it, I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. And the city document she ignored was about to end the conversation for good. The business had been running quietly for a long time. No storefront. No foot traffic. No signs in the yard. Just a small operation run entirely from inside my home, mostly online and by appointment only when necessary. Most neighbors didn't even know it existed, and that was intentional. Before I ever started, I did things the right way. I checked zoning regulations. I spoke with the city. I applied for a business license and received approval in writing. I kept records. Renewed everything on time. Made sure I wasn't violating noise limits, parking rules, or occupancy restrictions. The city had no problem with it. The HOA, until recently, hadn't either. For years, there had been no mention of home businesses in my direction. No warnings. No complaints. No questions. I paid my dues, followed the rules, and stayed out of HOA politics as much as possible. That changed when a new HOA president took over. She had a habit of reviewing things that had never been issues before. She walked the neighborhood more often. Took notes. Asked vague questions about what people did for work. Sent emails reminding residents that commercial activity wasn't allowed, without ever defining what that meant. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then one afternoon, an email landed in my inbox with my address in the subject line. She said the HOA had become aware of a business operating out of my home. She said this violated community standards and that all commercial activity must cease immediately. She warned that fines would be issued if I didn't comply. There was no mention of complaints. No reference to a specific rule. Just authority and urgency. I replied calmly. I told her I operated a licensed home business that complied with city zoning. I attached my license and approval letter. I explained that there was no impact on the neighborhood and that the city had cleared everything. Her response came quickly. She said HOA rules superseded city permission. She said the HOA didn't allow businesses, regardless of what the city said. She told me I needed to shut it down or face enforcement. That was the moment I realized something important. She wasn't asking questions. She wasn't trying to understand. She was counting on me not knowing where HOA authority actually ended. And she was about to find out just how wrong that assumption was. At first, I tried to keep things calm. I replied to her email politely and in writing. I explained again that my business was licensed and approved by the city. I attached the documents a second time. I pointed out that the HOA rules didn't explicitly ban home businesses, only activities that caused noise, traffic, or disruption. None of that applied to me. Her response wasn't about clarification. It was about authority. She said the HOA had always prohibited commercial activity, even if it wasn't written clearly. She said allowing one business would open the door for others. She said enforcement had to be consistent. Then she issued a deadline. I was given 10 days to shut the business down completely. If I didn't, daily fines would begin. Continued operation, she warned, could lead to legal action or suspension of HOA privileges. The language was firm. Final. I asked for a copy of the rule she was enforcing. She didn't provide one. Instead, I received another email, this one sent to the entire board, stating that my property was under review for unauthorized commercial use. It framed the situation as though I'd been hiding something, as though enforcement was overdue. That's when the pressure started spreading. A neighbor asked me casually if I was running something illegal. Another mentioned that the HOA president had told people she was cracking down on businesses to protect property values. Someone even suggested I was risking fines for the whole community. None of them had seen my license. They were repeating what they'd been told. A few days later, the first fine appeared on my HOA account. It wasn't large, but it was symbolic, a warning shot. The notice cited ongoing commercial activity and referenced a guideline that didn't actually exist in the governing documents. I contacted the HOA management company. They told me enforcement decisions came from the board president. They said if I wanted to dispute the fine, I'd need to appeal after complying. Stop first. Argue later. I contacted the board members directly. Most didn't respond. One replied cautiously, saying he wasn't fully aware of the situation and that the president was handling it. Another suggested I work it out privately. It was clear no one wanted to challenge her. The fines increased. Daily charges began stacking up. Late fees were added automatically. Each notice repeated the same phrase, unauthorized home business. No mention of city law. No acknowledgement of my documentation. I forwarded everything to the city's zoning department. I explained what the HOA was doing. I sent them copies of the notices and fines. I asked whether my business violated any zoning rule or permit condition. The response came back quickly. They said my business was fully compliant. They said the HOA had no authority to override city-issued licenses. They said if the HOA continued interfering, the city could issue a formal clarification letter. That was the turning point. I informed the HOA president that I'd contacted the city and that they were prepared to put their position in writing. Her reply was immediate and defensive. She said the city often misunderstood HOA authority. She said zoning approval didn't mean the HOA had to allow the activity. She warned me again to stop operating before things escalated further. That was when it became obvious. She wasn't mistaken. She was deliberately ignoring facts that didn't support her position. So I asked the city for more than an email. I requested official documentation, something stamped, signed, and unmistakable. Because once the city put its position on record, this would no longer be a dispute she could intimidate her way through. And the moment that document arrived, her control over the situation was about to disappear completely. The letter from the city arrived 3 days later. It wasn't casual. It wasn't friendly. It was written in clear, legal language, stamped with the city seal, and addressed directly to the HOA management company and the board. It stated that my business was legally licensed, zoned correctly, and operating in full compliance with municipal regulations. It made one thing unmistakably clear: the HOA had no authority to prohibit or interfere with a city-approved home business unless it violated specific, written HOA rules, and none existed. The letter went further. It warned that continued interference could expose the HOA to legal liability for harassment and unlawful enforcement. It advised them to cease all fines and enforcement actions immediately. I forwarded the letter to the HOA president. This time, there was no immediate reply. Hours passed. Then a full day. The silence was louder than any threat she'd sent before. The next message didn't come from her. It came from the HOA's attorney. The tone was completely different. Professional. Careful. Neutral. They said they were reviewing the situation and that enforcement related to my property had been temporarily paused. By that evening, every fine disappeared from my account. The next day, I received notice that the board would be discussing clarification of home-based business enforcement at the upcoming HOA meeting. I attended. So did several neighbors. The city's letter was read aloud, line by line. The attorney explained that HOA authority did not override municipal licensing. He explained that vague language couldn't be enforced retroactively. He explained that any future enforcement would require clearly written rules adopted through proper procedure. The HOA president tried to defend herself. She said she was acting to protect the community. She said she believed the HOA had broader authority. She said she was trying to prevent abuse. But none of it mattered. Because belief isn't law. And authority doesn't come from confidence, it comes from jurisdiction. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to formally stop all enforcement against my business. They issued a written notice acknowledging the city's position and confirming that licensed home businesses were permitted so long as they complied with existing rules. The HOA president didn't speak after that. She didn't argue. She didn't challenge the vote. She sat quietly while her authority collapsed in real time, undone by a document she'd never bothered to read. The business stayed open, uninterrupted, unchallenged. And the moment the city license was recognized as final, the entire conflict ended, not with anger or shouting, but with paperwork doing exactly what it was meant to do. Because when real authority steps in, false authority has nowhere left to stand. After that meeting, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. The emails stopped. The warnings disappeared. The HOA's tone softened almost overnight. A formal notice was sent out to all residents clarifying that licensed home businesses were permitted, provided they followed city regulations and existing HOA rules. The language was careful and neutral, but the shift was obvious. What had once been framed as a crackdown was now being walked back quietly. No one mentioned my name. The HOA president avoided the topic entirely. She stopped making rounds through the neighborhood. Stopped sending broad, threatening reminders about commercial activity. Enforcement, when it happened at all, became slow and procedural instead of aggressive. A few neighbors reached out privately. Some admitted they'd believed what they'd been told at first. Others said they'd been afraid to challenge the HOA before, even when things didn't seem right. Seeing the city step in changed that. It reminded people that HOA authority isn't unlimited, and that documentation matters. As for the business, nothing changed. I kept operating the same way I always had. Quietly. Legally. By the book. No increase in traffic. No disruption. No complaints. The difference was confidence. Not just mine, but the community's. The board eventually revised its guidelines to be clearer about what it could and couldn't regulate. Vague language was replaced with specifics. Enforcement required citations, not assumptions. The HOA president didn't resign, but her influence faded. Decisions were routed through committees. Legal review became standard. Power stopped being centralized in one person's interpretation. And that was the real outcome. Not revenge. Not embarrassment. Just limits being restored. Because when authority forgets where it comes from, it grows reckless. And when it's finally challenged with facts, records, and jurisdiction, it shrinks back to its proper size. Sometimes the strongest response isn't confrontation. It's letting the right authority speak, and letting false authority quietly step aside.